Okay, so let's have a look at doing some CSS. So first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to create a very simple HTML document, and then we'll look at how the styling actually gets applied to that. So first things first, as we do pretty much every lesson, we're just going to open terminal. So I'm going to use command and space to do that. And term, of course, Windows users, you will be using git bash. So let me just bring this over here from my second screen. We need to navigate to our dev folder, so cd dev, and then cd into classwork. Of course, you can use autocomplete here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a directory for all of our CSS. I'm going to say mkdir intro-to-css. Brilliant, let's just ls that. We've got all of our HTML work and our intro to CSS. Okay, let's go ahead and create our CSS work for today. So we're going to cd into intro to CSS. And you see that I'm using autocomplete here, but because there's two things that start with intro-to-, it's only autocompleting so much. So let's see what happens when I hit tab again. Well, it's giving me some options. Which one do I want to autocomplete it to? Well, if I continue to hit tab, it's going to highlight, each of them and kind of loop around again. So we want it to autocomplete to intro to CSS. Of course, you could just type this in all the way, but as you get kind of more comfortable with the terminal and the command line, I think you should start to use autocomplete a little more often. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter again, or return again, to go into intro to CSS. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do, because we're making a website, we're going to need to make a HTML document. But we're doing CSS, I hear you say. Well, don't worry about it. We will get onto it in a moment, and I'll show you how it all links up. So let's just touch an index.html and just ls to make sure it's there. Great. And then we're going to open this up in VS Code. So we're going to use code, and then we want to reference this folder or this directory. So we'll use code space dot and hit return. And we have our intros to CSS open in VS Code. Fantastic. So let's go ahead into our index.html here. First thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put the boilerplate in. So use exclamation mark to use Emmet abbreviation and hit return to get this up and in. Fab. So let's just practice with a couple of things. We're just going to put a couple of elements in our body. So we'll just add a h1 with welcome to my website. Feel free to put whatever you like in there. And then we'll just have a h2 with practicing some CSS. That'll do for now. We're going to add quite a lot more to this, but that will do for now. And it's mainly just so that we get something up when we start live server to make sure that everything's working as it should be. So Command or Control S to save that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this over here like this. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier for you to read. And then right click on our file and open with live server. This might open on my second screen. Yes, absolutely it has. So let me just bring this over. Excellent. And I'm doing that thing again where I can have two things open kind of side by side. Okay, so one of the first things that we can do to add some styling to this is we can just inside our head tags here, if I underneath the document, I make some more tags, we can just add some style tags here. Now, if I just press return here, you'll see that VS Code is being quite helpful. It puts the closing style tag on a further lower line, and we are now indented in. Now, in HTML, we don't have to indent, but we really should be, because you can see that this, for example, this indentation here makes this body so much easier to read. You know, if it looked like this, everything just be one solid column and it'd be very difficult to read. So you see that VS Code kind of knows this and is deliberately indenting us to kind of help us out here. Okay, so inside the style here, what we can do is, let's say we want to make our H1 red color. So what we can say is H1, just like this, and then we can add some curly brackets. So for me, it's shift and square bracket that we have to use. And we use these curly brackets. And in here, we can add styles that relate to that H1, that we want to apply to all of the H1 elements on this page. So again, I'm just going to hit return, and you see VS Code is being nice and helpful. Don't worry about this yellow line under here. Basically, this is just saying, hey, it's empty at the moment, and you shouldn't leave it like that. It's not going to break anything because it's yellow. It's a warning. It's not red. It's not an error. But yeah, it's saying, hey, you shouldn't have empty rule sets. That's a bit bad practice. So you should fill this with something. So let's go ahead and make this H1 red. So what we can do here is we can say color, colon, then I'm just going to type the word red, R-E-D. We do need to end all of our lines, our properties, with a semicolon as well. And these are just the rules of CSS. It's the way that we have to write it. So let's go ahead and Command S that. Just note that we're spelling this the American color. There's no U here, because if it was, it would error out and it would not work. So it has to be the American spelling of color. So I've just saved this using Command S or Control S. Let's head over. Oh, fantastic. We've got some styling on our website. So again, this doesn't really matter in terms of accessibility. The accessibility side of it comes in how you're structuring your HTML. But when it comes to actual styling and the visual look and feel of your website, that's where CSS comes in. Okay, so we've colored our H1 red. Fantastic. So what we could do here is we could add a bunch of other styles. We could have loads and loads of styles here for our huge web page, our big news site, or our big e-commerce website. But it is going to get a little bit unwieldy, just having this one huge long document full of all of our styles and all of our styles and all of our HTML. So there is actually a better way of doing this. And what we can do is we can add all of our CSS into a separate file. Now, you would structure this a different way, and we'll get, with our file paths and stuff like that, we will get into that when we have slightly bigger, more complex apps. But for now, just inside this intro to CSS folder, I'm going to add another file. And I'm just going to do this in VS Code. We could do it in the terminal, of course, but we're just going to do it in VS Code. And I'm going to call this style.css. And you'll see that we've now got open here is that new style.css file. Now, let's say we want to instead style our H2 to be green. Let's do that in here. So remember the syntax. We say H2 because we want to get all of the H2 elements on the page. We add some curly brackets and we hit return. And then I'm going to say color, colon, green, and then add a semicolon afterwards. Okay, so if I save this now and I make sure that our index.html is saved, let's go and have a look over at our website. So nothing's changed. Well, the reason for that is is that while here in the HTML, when we're doing this kind of styling, well, it knows where that is. The HTML document is read from the top all the way down to the bottom. So it picks up this style. But it doesn't know that we've got an extra file over here with all of our styles in. It doesn't know that. So what we need to do is we need to link these things up. So here, just inside the head tags, I'm going to put another tag called a link. Now, inside here, what we need is kind of to tell it that this, what we're linking is a style sheet, and also we need to tell it where it is. So the rules of this is basically in the link inside this here, we need to put rel. And it's just telling it what the relationship of this document is, like what actually is it. So we're going to say equals, and then inside the quotation marks, we will say it is a style sheet. Great, so we're telling it it's a style sheet, but we need to now tell it where that style sheet is. So what we can do is we can literally just add a space after this style sheet, and remember I'm outside of these quotes now, but still inside the tag. And we will say href, and this, yeah, it specifies the URL of the linked resource. Now we don't need to give it the full www.ourwebsite.com/ or anything like that. What we can just say is href equals, and then we can just type in the path from this HTML file to this styles. So here, all we need is style.css. And you can see actually VS Code is coming up and saying, hey, I think you mean this one here. I would encourage you actually to start typing, see what comes up and use this to help you type it. Because you see, humans, we make typos and errors, but the computer doesn't do that so much. Okay, so if I command an S this now to save this, hooray, you'll see that our H2 has now gone green. And that's because it's now linked in all of the styles inside this style.css. Excellent. This is a much tidier way of doing styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut or copy this with Command X or Control X, and I'm just going to paste it in here. Let's go back here and just get rid of our style tags and hit Command and S to save. Make sure that that's all good. And then come back over here. Brilliant. We've now got all of our styles nice and tidy in our style.css. Okay, so the thing with CSS is it's cascading style sheets. So they're sheets of styles that cascade. Okay, well, what does cascading mean? And here's one example of why they're cascading. So here we have H1, and we're setting the color as red. So now if I say here H1 and add curly brackets, and I say color blue and add in my semicolon, I save this with Command S and come over, you'll see that it's picked up kind of the last style in our style sheets. So this tells us that our style sheets are being read from top to bottom. So if you set something up here, it will then be overwritten by anything that's down here. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay then, let's now have a look at some of the other ways that we can grab elements from our HTML and style them in our CSS. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add another h2. And in here, I'm going to say CSS with class. Now, if we save this and we go back to our website here, you'll see that because in our CSS we said, get all of the H2s and color them green, this has come up as green. Fantastic. That's exactly what we expect. Well, what we can do here is we can give this element a class. So we can say class, and you see that I'm inside that H2 kind of opening tag here. So class equals, and then let's think of a class to give this. And what I'm going to call it is subtitle. This could be anything, but it's a good idea to keep it kind of what it is, because if you come back to this code later on, you might not know exactly what you were intending to do. So it's a good idea to name things that make sense. So I'm going to call this subtitle. Now what we can do is we can go into our style.css, and just under here, we can grab that subtitle. Now, because it's a class, there's something that we need to do to get it. We need to add a dot, and then we need to type the name of the class. So it was subtitle. So we're saying dot and then the name of the class. So after this, again, curly brackets, just like every other element that we're styling. And then here I'm going to say color, colon, let's go with yellow. Or let's go with yellow-green, actually, because that's a little bit easier to see on screens. Okay, and then add a semicolon. Okay, Command S, and head back to here. So you see, whilst we're still colouring this H2 green, this one we're grabbing it by its class and colouring it that sort of lighter yellowy sort of green here. So this is one way that we can grab elements in our CSS from our HTML in our CSS using classes. Okay, let's have a look at another way of getting elements. So we're going to say H2, and we're going to say CSS with an ID, an identification. So inside our opening tag here, I'm going to say ID equals, and then we think of an ID. So let's say next dash subtitle. Again, you can call it whatever you like here, but you just need to remember what it is when we come to do it, to grab it in the CSS. So Command S to save. Then let's go to our style. And the way that we get an ID is we use the hash. Now, depending on your age and the language that you the version of English that you speak, this might be called the hash. It might be called the pound symbol. If you're quite young, you might know it as the hashtag symbol. But either way, I'm going to call it the hash because that's what I grew up calling it. So we use a hash. Now, on a Mac keyboard, on an English Mac keyboard, you might need to use Option and 3. For Windows users, it's probably Shift and one of the buttons over the right-hand side, maybe near your @ symbol. And American keyboards, Mac keyboards, it might be one of those. It might even be Shift and 2. Have a play around to see where it is on your keyboard. There doesn't seem to be a standard as to where that lives. But anyway, so we've got our hash symbol in here, and this basically tells our CSS, hey, we're going to look for an ID. And then what we do is we just give it the name of the ID. So we'll say next dash subtitle space, and then some curly brackets. You don't have to have the space here, but it just neatens everything up if you do. So inside these curly brackets, I will then say color is, let's think of a color. Let's actually use just one of the colors that's in here. I'm going to go with magenta, nice hot pink. Then don't forget to add our semicolon at the end and Command S. And there you go, we've grabbed it with an ID. Just something to bear in mind with these is that you can have as many classes, you could have many elements with the class of subtitle. You could have loads and loads and loads of them in your HTML, but you should only ever have one unique ID. So you can have lots of elements with an ID, but those IDs themselves should be unique. Just one of the subtle differences between the two. We generally use IDs more when it comes to manipulating elements with JavaScript rather than with CSS, but you can still get those things in, you can still get elements using the ID in your CSS as well. We'll come on to grabbing elements more in JavaScript a little bit later on, but this is just something that we can do. So what I want you to, we've just looked at color so far, but there are loads and loads of CSS properties that you can use. So I'm just going to give you a very small flavor of what can be done here, and we'll move on to slightly more advanced positioning and stuff in a moment. So for this next subtitle, we've given it the color. What we can do is we could change its font, for example. So we'll say font family. Now, I would very much encourage you to use VS Code's kind of autocomplete for you so that you don't make as many typos. And it's a good thing to get into the habit of, because you'll start to realize when you've made a mistake as well. So we can go to font family and say, what font family do we want? Now, we could choose one of these, but let's talk about it as we type it out. So I'm going to go with Arial. And if we just kind of leave that there and hit Command S, now you'll see what should have happened is this has turned to Arial. You'll see that it's a different font to the others. Well, that's great. Now, it may have actually not worked for you. That's okay. That's absolutely fine. But what we can do is, just in case someone's computer does not have Arial available to them, we can add what's called a fallback. So we can add a comma after this, and we could say, for example, Helvetica. Now, there is a bit of a joke as to, is it Arial, is it Helvetica? They're completely the same. There are subtle differences between them, but they basically look the same to somebody that's not kind of visually trained like me. So we'll say, hey, if the computer does not have Arial on it, instead go ahead and use Helvetica. Now, I do have Arial. That's great. So this is Arial. But if I did not, it would then instead use Helvetica. Now, it's a good idea to always use a final fallback. So here we can add what's called, we can add this kind of final fallback. Now, we should use the most basic kind of definition of a font as possible. And really, there's two options that we have. We either have serif fonts or sans serif fonts. Now, if you're confused as to what they are, let me just zoom in a little bit on here. But this actually is called Times New Roman, this font here. And the serifs are just these little kind of ticks and edges on the letters. These kind of little stylistic flicks on the ends of the letters. So this is a serif font because it has those serifs. It's a layover from like the printing presses and stuff like that. Whereas this does not have those. This Arial does not have serif. So it is sans serif, and sans is just not, I think, in French. So it's without serif is what it means. So what this allows you to do kind of as a designer is say, well, I'd like you to use the font I picked. I would like you to use the correct font. But I understand that you might not have that. So are we going for a kind of a modern font without serifs, or are we going for a slightly more traditional font that does have serifs? So in this instance, because these are sans serif fonts, we are going to type sans -serif. Fantastic. So now if you don't have Arial, you don't have Helvetica, it will just go and pick the first non-serif font that is available. And this just means that things don't break. It means that things work and kind of look about how they should. So let me just zoom back out here to 100%. So just as an example of something else that you could do, we could give it a background color instead. So we could say background color, and again, I'm going to use the autocomplete here. And this is a bright pink. Let's give it cyan as the background color. So if I do Command S here, fantastic. You'll see that this element has got a background color of bright sky blue or cyan. Excellent. Now, I could go in all day to all of the properties that you have available. However, I would very much encourage you to instead, and I'll put this in the text accompaniment to this video, instead go and have a look at the CSS properties reference here on W3 Schools. Now, this is a list of, I think, all of them, but there may be some left out, of every property that you can use. So you see, we've just used this background color here. We could add background images, positioning backgrounds, we can add borders, you know, all sorts of things. Now, there are loads of them, and I couldn't possibly go through all of these. But what I encourage you to do is to stop, when you've stopped this video, is go and have a play with some of them. You know, see what works. Some things will make no difference because they have to be used in a certain way, but other things will make things happen. So for example, height and width might make things happen, or the margins might make things happen. Borders will make things happen. You know, there's loads and loads of these that have different applications. And I really do encourage you to go and have a look through it and try some out.